shocking discovery inside Clarence House has left the entire royal family reeling. During what seemed like a routine renovation, workers stumbled upon a hidden section behind Queen Camilla's bedroom wall. And what they uncovered was so unexpected, it sent shockwaves through the palace. From mysterious objects to deeply personal secrets, this revelation has raised unsettling questions about Camilla's private past and her role within the monarchy. Why was it concealed for so long? And what does it mean for the royals now? The routine inspection that turned shocking. It was meant to be nothing more than a routine procedure, the kind of quiet palace check that rarely draws attention. Teams from internal security had been conducting structural reviews across the royal residences, ensuring that the oldest sections of Buckingham Palace were safe, discreetly maintained, and free of any overlooked hazards. Normally, such work happened in the background, technicians measuring cracks, inspectors noting signs of dampness, electricians checking concealed wiring. Hardly the kind of event that sparks whispers in gilded corridors. Yet on this day, inside Queen Camilla's private suite,
Buckingham Palace, one of the most famous buildings in the world, a symbol of Britain.
Something unusual stirred. Her bedroom, elegant but heavily shielded from prying eyes, was scheduled for inspection under the guise of structural reinforcement. Centuries-old plaster, ornate cornices, and heavy drapery made the room not just regal, but unusually difficult to survey. As the team began, they noticed something curious along one of the interior walls. A faint irregularity, barely perceptible to the untrained eye, ran down a section behind an ornate tapestry. The seam did not align with the rest of the wall's design. At first, it was dismissed as harmless settling, the kind that naturally occurs in old buildings.
No other building on Earth combines being a family home, the office of the head of state.
But as instruments were placed against the surface, the readings came back odd. The wall was not as solid as expected. Behind the polished facade, there seemed to be an empty cavity, deeper than any of the room's blueprints suggested. Protocol required that anything suspicious be reported immediately, and so senior palace security was summoned. A hush fell over the room. This was not an ordinary discovery. This was something concealed, and concealed deliberately. The inspectors worked carefully.
Continue inside the palaces as well, as they also house thousands of priceless treasures.
Pulling the tapestry aside and tracing the faint outline of what looked like a sealed entry point. Dust gathered thick at the seams, suggesting it had not been touched in decades. By now, even the most seasoned members of the team felt the shift in atmosphere. The inspection, meant to last less than an hour, stretched on as whispers circulated. A simple crack had turned into a doorway of questions. What lay behind it? Who had sealed it? And why had no record of it existed? The decision was made quickly. The wall would be examined further, and as the first tools were brought closer, everyone in that room sensed that this was not just a routine inspection anymore. It was the beginning of something that could unravel more than plaster and stone. But the real question lingered. Was this hidden wall protecting a secret or concealing a scandal? Stay with us. The truth is about to surface. A hidden passage revealed. The quiet tapping of tools against plaster echoed strangely in Camilla's bedroom. Every scrape and measured cut deepened the sense that the inspectors were no longer dealing with an ordinary wall. Bit by bit, the surface gave way, revealing not just a hollow cavity, but something far more deliberate. Beneath the polished plaster and decorative molding lay a concealed panel, its edges sharp, its frame reinforced, as though whoever built it had intended it to remain hidden for generations. The discovery shifted the room's mood instantly. What was expected to be a tedious survey now felt like the opening chapter of a mystery novel unfolding in real time. Palace security authorized a careful removal of the panel, each movement made with meticulous precision. Finally, with a reluctant creak, the concealed door loosened, expelling a gust of air that was thick, stale, and unmistakably aged. It was the breath of a space that had not seen daylight in decades. Behind it, the beam of a flashlight caught something unexpected.
The 4 continents in the corner, and Great Britain has been made much larger in scale.
A narrow passage, lined with stone, coated in dust and cobwebs. The air smelled of mildew, and the silence was so heavy that even the inspectors hesitated before stepping inside. The corridor was narrower than a man's shoulders, forcing anyone who entered to move carefully, almost sideways. The construction itself seemed old, perhaps dating back to modifications long lost in palace records. Some whispered that many of the royal residences contained hidden rooms and secret passages, relics of an era when kings and queens required escape routes or private chambers beyond the reach of servants. But this felt different. The architecture was less like an escape route and more like a vault, deliberately sealed, deliberately forgotten. Palace blueprints confirmed the strangeness. No mention of a hollow corridor in that section of the building. No record of additional chambers branching off Camilla's suite.
Down in the King's Gallery, there is a map above the fireplace.
Whoever created it had ensured its secrecy by omitting it from official documentation. Step by cautious step, the inspection team moved forward. Dust fell from the ceiling with every motion, and the faint scuttling of unseen insects made the silence even more unnerving. The deeper they went, the clearer it became that this was no simple structural quirk. The passage had been deliberately closed off, and yet something lay waiting at its end. The corridor terminated in a small alcove, its stonework darker, more worn. There, barely illuminated by the swaying flashlights, stood a large object, a chest, locked, weathered, and eerily out of place. It looked like it had been placed there with intent, then abandoned to time. The team exchanged glances. What had started as plaster dust in a royal bedroom had led them to a forgotten chamber. And as they prepared to examine the chest, one truth was clear. Someone had gone to great lengths to ensure it would never be found. The chest in the shadows. The object sat in silence at the far end of the hidden corridor, cloaked in dust as if time itself had tried to bury it. The beam of a flashlight danced across its surface, revealing a chest that seemed oddly out of place in such a narrow, suffocating passage. Heavy, rectangular, and bound with iron fittings, it looked centuries older than the room it was hidden behind. Its hinges were corroded, its wood warped with age, yet the lock remained stubbornly intact, as though it had been sealed with purpose, not merely abandoned. The inspectors paused, unsure whether to proceed. Discovering an undocumented chamber was one thing, but an object so deliberately concealed raised the stakes. Protocol demanded that palace security take immediate control. Within minutes, senior officers arrived, their footsteps echoing ominously through the hidden corridor. They ordered everything to be documented. Photographs of the chest, precise measurements of the alcove.
It's an amazing work of art, but what's incredible also is the metal dial and how that works.
And a record of every detail before even the smallest latch was touched. Even so, the atmosphere grew heavier with each passing second. The team couldn't shake the feeling that the chest was more than just forgotten storage. There was a deliberate quality to its placement, centered perfectly within the alcove, facing outward, like it had been waiting to be discovered. No dust trails led to or from it, suggesting no one had touched it in decades. The lock, though rusted, appeared strong. Attempts to force it open with ordinary tools failed at first, as if the chest resisted being disturbed. One officer suggested moving it back to a secure location for controlled examination, but others argued it should be opened on-site before too many people were aware of its existence. The debate alone underscored how unusual the discovery was. This wasn't simply another relic from palace history.
While others are just for the family, more secluded and secretive.
It was something hidden with intention. The decision was eventually made to proceed cautiously but directly. Crowbars and specialist equipment were brought in, their clanging against the iron fittings echoing through the narrow passage. Each strike felt louder than the last, reverberating in the stomachs of everyone present. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the lock cracked with a jarring snap. For a long moment, no one moved. The chest stood vulnerable, its secrets inches from exposure. Flashlights hovered above, waiting for the lid to be lifted. The senior officer gave the order, and slowly, with a groan of protest from its rusted hinges, the chest opened. What lay inside was not stacks of gold, forgotten jewels, or old palace inventory. Instead, the first glimpse revealed layers of parchment, ribbon-bound bundles, and leather covers dulled with age. The room fell silent. Whatever this was, it was no trivial discovery. The past, it seemed, had been locked away deliberately, and now it was demanding to be heard. But what if these fragile pages weren't just memories, but evidence of secrets long buried? Keep watching. The revelations are only beginning. Contents that defied expectation. When the lid of the chest finally creaked open, the team leaned closer, bracing themselves for what they thought might be outdated inventories, forgotten ledgers, or perhaps even discarded personal effects. Yet the sight before them stilled every breath in the narrow passage. Inside, beneath a thin layer of dust, lay bundles of letters tied neatly with faded ribbons, stacks of parchment that had yellowed with time, and several leather-bound journals that bore the unmistakable weight of something personal. It was not the typical clutter one might expect in a royal residence. These items were intimate, curated, and carefully arranged, as though someone had deliberately preserved them. Each bundle appeared fragile, the paper so thin it could crumble with the slightest mishandling. The faint scent of aging ink and pressed parchment rose from the chest, carrying with it an almost haunting sense of presence.
After the staircase, visitors arrive at a series of state rooms.
Like stepping uninvited into another life's private reflections. The inspectors hesitated, aware that what they had stumbled upon might transcend their mandate. Palace security, however, ordered the contents to be handled with precision. White gloves were pulled on, photographs taken, and every item logged. Slowly, the first set of letters was lifted out, revealing delicate handwriting across envelopes that had never been posted. The ink was faint but legible, the pen strokes deliberate and full of character. As one journal was carefully opened, the handwriting inside was immediately familiar to those who had studied royal history. These were not anonymous notes or trivial household records. The words belonged to someone whose voice had once captivated the entire world. Though the team refrained from reading deeply at this stage, the names, the phrasing, and the dates offered unmistakable hints. These writings were not official documents. They were private reflections, pages that seemed never intended for the public eye. What made the discovery even more confounding was its location. Such items would typically be archived, catalogued, or stored in secure collections where historians and royal officials ensured preservation. Yet here they were, hidden behind a bedroom wall in a sealed passage no one had known existed.
The perfectly clean and large windows allow her subjects a glimpse of the monarch as she passes by.
The deliberate concealment suggested purpose, perhaps even secrecy, far beyond simple oversight. The journals themselves varied in size. Some were small, pocket-sized, with worn covers that suggested frequent handling. Others were heavier, bound in dark leather with gold-etched corners, the kind of craftsmanship reserved for items meant to endure. Within the chest, folded pages slipped between the volumes, as if they had been tucked away hastily. There were also envelopes, unsealed, containing notes addressed without formality, written as though the writer never intended them to be sent. Every new layer uncovered raised more questions. Who had placed them there? Why had they been hidden in such a way? And perhaps most pressing, what truths might they contain? The team knew immediately that this was not just a discovery of old paper, but of voices silenced and stories left untold. The chest had not revealed treasure or relics, but something more potent, testimony. The kind of testimony that could rattle the walls of the monarchy far more than any misplaced jewel or forgotten heirloom ever could. Diana's unheard voice. The moment the first pages were read in silence, the atmosphere inside the hidden passage shifted. What began as a structural inspection had transformed into something almost sacred. The handwriting, delicate yet firm, carried a familiarity that left no doubt. It was Diana's. Every curve of her letters, every flourish of ink matched what the world had seen in signed letters and notes she had once made public. But these were different. These were unfiltered, unguarded, and written in spaces where she clearly believed no one else would ever look. At first glance, the entries read like diary reflections, short sentences, fragmented thoughts, moments captured in raw honesty. Yet,
I began to realise, what was going on in my mind and hers in particular.
the content struck deeper than casual musings. There were confessions of loneliness, unspoken fears, and a recurring sense of being overshadowed. Diana's words carried no intention of performance. They weren't meant for interviews, for public sympathy, or for shaping legacy. They were words meant only for herself, words that seemed to ache with the weight of their truth. One passage, written in fading blue ink, read,
In reality, she was chastised by the media and stifled by the conservative royal family.
"They smile at her now, the way I once hoped they'd smile at me. It is as though my absence has made me easier to love, but never while I was here." Though no names were explicitly mentioned, the implication was unmistakable. The shadow of Camilla lingered in nearly every line, not as a direct accusation, but as an ever-present reminder of a wound that had never healed. Another entry carried a darker tone.
Acting as an ambassador for the society, she attended the World Congress on Osteoporosis in Lisbon.
"Sometimes I wonder if my voice will only matter when I am gone. Perhaps then they will stop softening me into what I never was." The thought was chilling, not because of any direct prediction, but because it revealed Diana's fear of erasure, of being rewritten into something palatable for others' comfort. What startled the review team most was the sheer consistency of the reflections. Across multiple journals, spanning months and perhaps years, Diana returned again and again to themes of invisibility, isolation, and the fragile hope that one day her truth would surface. There was no bitterness in her words, but a quiet resignation, as though she had already accepted how history might treat her. Mixed among these reflections were letters, unsent, addressed without stamps, some folded and tucked into journals as if hidden from even herself. These letters carried the same voice, but took on a more intimate tone. They were written to unnamed recipients, though the context hinted at family, at confidants, perhaps even at her sons when they were too young to understand. The palace security officers, normally trained to remain impartial, were visibly shaken. They were not just handling paper, they were encountering a voice that had been silenced for decades, now speaking louder than ever. It was clear that Diana had left behind more than reflections. She had left behind fragments of a legacy that someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to conceal. And now, those fragments had broken through the walls, literally and figuratively, demanding to be heard. So could these hidden writings force the palace to confront truths it hoped were buried forever? Stay with us. The panic was only just beginning. Palace. In panic. The chest had barely been removed from the hidden passage when the atmosphere inside Buckingham Palace shifted from curiosity to crisis. What had been dismissed as a structural inspection had suddenly uncovered documents of unimaginable sensitivity, and the implications were too heavy to ignore. Within hours, the find was quietly transported under guarded escort to a secure archive room. But whispers of what had been discovered spread faster than officials could contain them. Behind closed doors, senior advisors scrambled. The monarchy had long perfected the art of crisis management, measured statements, carefully crafted silences, and strategic distractions. But this was different. These weren't headlines about scandalous behavior or fleeting controversies. These were Diana's words, raw, private, and now undeniably real. And they had been hidden inside Camilla's bedroom wall. The optics alone threatened to shatter decades of carefully rebuilt trust. Meetings were called in rapid succession. Advisors, legal experts, and senior courtiers debated in hushed but heated tones. Some argued for immediate disclosure, insisting that concealment would only inflame suspicion if leaks emerged. Others urged complete secrecy, claiming that any acknowledgement would fuel speculation and reopen wounds the royal family had spent years trying to heal. King Charles, according to palace insiders, reacted with visible strain. For him, the revelation struck at both personal and institutional levels. This was not just about history, it was about his wife, his late ex-wife, and the fragile balance of loyalty and memory within the monarchy. His first concern was said to be his sons. How would William and Harry react? How could this discovery be explained to them, let alone to the public? Security officers involved in the inspection were placed under strict confidentiality agreements, their involvement effectively erased from records within days. Yet silence proved impossible to enforce. Too many staff had witnessed the operation, and even among those bound by duty, quiet murmurs began slipping into the palace corridors. The question repeated again and again: who had placed Diana's writings inside Camilla's private quarters, and why had they been hidden rather than archived? The uncertainty gave rise to a storm of speculation. Some insiders suspected the chest had been moved during the chaotic period following Diana's death, misplaced, and later concealed without explanation. Others whispered of deliberate concealment, a choice meant to keep the writings away from public view, or even away from her sons. The press office, normally quick to issue clarifying statements, did nothing. No confirmation, no denial, not even a carefully worded deflection. Their silence spoke volumes. The absence of control, the lack of narrative, created an even greater vacuum, one the media and public were eager to fill. What had started as a hidden wall and a dusty chest had now evolved into something much larger, a test of transparency, loyalty, and the monarchy's to survive truths it had long hoped would remain buried. For the palace, panic was no longer about what had been found.
Play our part in making our children feel valued.
It was about what might happen if the world learned everything Diana had left behind. But was the silence a shield to protect the crown, or a sign that Diana's truths could shatter it? Stay tuned, The Prince's Awakening says it all. William and Harry's painful awakening. When word of the discovery reached Diana's sons, it wasn't delivered through formal palace channels or carefully prepared briefings. Instead, fragments of information trickled into their worlds. An urgent message here, a hushed explanation there, until the reality became undeniable. Their mother's private words, hidden for decades, had been found sealed behind a wall in Camilla's bedroom. For Prince William, the revelation was more than unsettling. It was deeply personal. Diana's memory was not just his inheritance, it was the foundation of his public role. Every step toward the throne carried her shadow, and now her voice had resurfaced in a way that both honored her and reopened wounds he had spent years stitching closed. Those journals were not history, they were pieces of his mother, preserved and then concealed. The very idea that they had been hidden in Camilla's private quarters felt almost like an intrusion on her legacy. Prince Harry's reaction, though similar in grief, took on a sharper edge. Distance from the institution had already given him the freedom to speak openly, and this discovery only reinforced his belief that too much of his mother's story had been controlled, edited, or silenced. According to close sources, Harry demanded immediate transparency, insisting that Diana's writings belonged first to her family, not to palace vaults or secret committees. The contrast between the brothers was striking, yet their pain was shared. William leaned toward measured caution, wary of exposing his mother's words to the storm of public scrutiny before he could fully understand them. Harry, on the other hand, saw no reason for delay, no justification for secrecy when their mother's voice had already been taken from them once before. Behind closed doors, their conversations were said to be raw, emotional, and at times fractious. Old tensions resurfaced, the same divisions that had grown in recent years, but beneath them lay a truth neither could escape. Diana's presence had returned, demanding to be acknowledged, and both sons felt the pull of responsibility. The palace had hoped to manage the fallout quietly, but the involvement of William and Harry made that impossible. This was no longer just about security protocols or royal image. It was about a mother's voice, unearthed from silence, and two sons unwilling to let it be buried again. For William and Harry, the awakening was painful, but it was also a reminder. Their mother's truth had survived, hidden in shadows, and now it had found them. Camilla's silence and anger. When the discovery was finally brought to Camilla's attention, her reaction was swift, sharp, and layered with disbelief. Those present during the briefing recalled her expression shifting from confusion to fury in a matter of moments. She demanded to know who had authorized the inspection, why her private suite had been entered so thoroughly, and most importantly, how something so sensitive had been found there without her knowledge. Her aides attempted to reassure her, framing the inspection as routine and unavoidable, but their words barely registered. Camilla was said to be livid, not only at the intrusion, but at the implication. To have Diana's most personal writings unearthed within her own chambers carried a symbolic weight she could not ignore. It was as if history itself had crept into her bedroom, refusing to let her escape the shadow she had lived under for decades. Outwardly, Camilla chose silence. No public statement, no comment, not even a hint of acknowledgement passed her lips. Behind palace walls, however, her anger was palpable. She accused staff of incompetence, even betrayal, suggesting that someone might have orchestrated the entire ordeal to humiliate her. The idea that Diana's voice could suddenly rise again from within her most private space was more than inconvenient. It was a humiliation that threatened to undo years of careful image building. Her relationship with King Charles reportedly strained under the weight of the discovery. While Charles urged restraint, preferring to manage the fallout through quiet strategy, Camilla's instinct was defensive, even combative. She wanted answers, but she also wanted control. Control that seemed to slip further with every whisper about what had been found. Advisors debated whether Camilla should confront the issue publicly, but she refused. Any denial, she argued, would only inflame speculation. Yet her silence bred its own kind of suspicion. To the public, her refusal to speak appeared like evasion. To insiders, it looked like fear. What angered her most, according to those close to the Queen Consort, was not the discovery itself, but the narrative it threatened to ignite, that even in her reign, Diana's presence remained unshakable. The past had once again broken through, and this time, it had done so within the walls she considered her sanctuary.
And like each one of you here, she loved to write. For a decade, she wrote poems.
Camilla's silence was not strength. It was the sound of someone cornered by ghosts she could never fully escape. A legacy that refuses to stay buried. The chest discovery did more than expose forgotten journals. It tore through decades of silence. Diana's voice, thought to be confined to memory and carefully edited archives, resurfaced in her own hand, unfiltered and impossible to soften. Every word carried weight, every line a reminder that her story was not finished, no matter how hard the palace tried to control it. This was not the Diana immortalized in glossy photographs or royal documentaries. These were not rehearsed interviews or second-hand accounts. What emerged from behind Camilla's bedroom wall were private reflections, honest, raw, and painfully intimate. They spoke of invisibility, of longing, of a woman whose public smile often masked quiet despair. And now, decades later, those thoughts rang louder than any carefully crafted statement the palace could issue. For Prince William and Prince Harry, the writings felt like fragments of their mother returned. They revealed sides of her the brothers had not fully known, moments of reflection she had chosen never to share.
Welsh mounted pony, and I remember there was a very large horse show next door to us called Ditchling Horse Show.
To them, the find was both gift and wound, an unexpected connection, but one wrapped in the pain of secrecy. Why had these pages been hidden, and why here, of all places? For Camilla, the implications were devastating. It wasn't just that Diana's journals had been uncovered, it was where they were uncovered. Behind her bedroom wall in her private quarters, the symbolism could not be dismissed. Even without proof of how the writings ended up there, the discovery painted her as the keeper of another woman's silenced truth. Within Buckingham Palace, the atmosphere shifted from anxiety to reckoning. Courtiers debated, advisors argued, but the reality was unavoidable. Diana's voice had escaped the shadows. The monarchy, built on order and control, now faced a force it could not contain. Because some legacies are too powerful to be buried, Diana's was one of them. And through those words, pulled from the darkness of a sealed wall, her presence returned, not as a memory, but as a voice impossible to erase. So what do you think this hidden discovery means for Camilla and the monarchy's fragile balance? Can Diana's voice ever be silenced again? We'd like to hear your thoughts. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.